My name's Alana Sherman, and I'm a volunteer at Otis Library. And in conjunction with Otis, I'm the originator of Harris Sisters Month. This monthly event had its genesis 14 years ago with a program featuring former Connecticut Poet Laureate Marilyn Nelson, folk singers Sally Rogers, and former Three Rivers professor Edward Deere. Since that time, Harris Sisters Month has grown and grown. But this is the first poetry program we've had since that first one. And this program, sponsored by the L.C. Brown Fund, features a poet of equal talent and distinction, Norwich native, Hartford Poet Laureate, and Three Rivers Professor Frederick Douglass Knowles II. Praised for his eloquence, his charisma, his social activism, and his ability to communicate and live the power of words, Professor Knowles is the author of BlackRoseCity, a potent collection of poems addressing the struggles and successes of a black youth growing up in Norwich. Professor Knowles was a 2019 first place winner of the Nutmeg Poetry Award and received a 2020 Artistic Excellence Award in Poetry from the Artist Fellowship Program of the Connecticut Office of the Arts. He was also a 2018 Pushcart Prize nominee. I'm thrilled to announce that for this event, Professor Knowles agreed to create a poem specifically in homage to Sarah and Mary Harris and the legacy of Prudence Crandall's Black students. It's my belief that unearthing, following, and honoring the power of untold stories is a first and necessary part of any politics of inclusion. We're grateful for the many contributions Professor Knowles has made to such a politics. His stirring, expressive words amplify and illuminate the experiences of those who have too often been dispossessed and unacknowledged, but who nevertheless often persevere and rise. This approximately 40-minute reading will be followed by a 20-minute discussion period. The reading is being recorded for the Otis YouTube channel. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge our sign language interpreter, Joy Valenti, whose great work was recently illustrated in a Day article some of you might have read on the experiences of hearing children of deaf adults. Thank you for being here today, Joy. Professor Knowles.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. To the folks out there in the virtual world, welcome. I'm very honored to share Harris Sisters Month with Otis Library. Very grateful for the opportunity when Alana approached me, and to help record and account their magnificent deeds and from a heritage perspective. And so the collection I'm going to read from today is a collection I recently just finished titled Sinking in Moonlight Alone. And thematically I'm going to address the power of perseverance and the power of heritage, right, and where we come from. And so the first poem that I'm going to read, make sure I get my time. The first poem that I'm going to read is a poem about my uncle, Godwell Alexander Knowles, who was the first black motorcycle captain of New York City during the Harlem Renaissance, mid-1920s. And he's noted in this book called Black Shields that pays homage to black police officers in America. And he is the brother of my grandfather, who they were born in Key West, Florida. So I'm named after my great-grandfather, Frederick Douglass Knowles I, and he had my grandfather, Joseph Knowles, and his brother, Godwell Alexander Knowles. And actually, this is my great-grandmother here, Catherine Sweeting, who was their mother. And so they joined the Navy and moved up east. And of course, my grandfather landed in London, where my father and myself were born, and my great uncle landed in Harlem. And so this really talks about his story. And he was well known for, he started as a motorcycle captain, and he was promoted to detective, and he had cracked this huge staged kidnapping case involving an heir to Helena Rubinstein, who was a beauty mogul and so forth, an alleged son of Helena Rubinstein who staged this kidnapping, and my uncle cracked it. It was a very big case. So, and I found out that I never met him, and I found out he passed away on my birthday in 1992. He was living in Harlem, and I never knew. And he spoke fluent Spanish and fluent Italian, and I studied those in junior high school. So this poem is titled Feliz Cumpleaños Sobrino, which is happy birthday, nephew in Spanish, for Godwell Alexander Knowles, first black motorcycle captain of NYC. 1. Uncle Godwell slowly buttoned his uniform during the dank of the Depression. His Caribbean skin, a shaded crayon amid a force of Irish white pastels, coloring outside the integrated lines of the city. His police applications lost, like justice, until he queried the governor to crack his missing case. 2. It most likely was the way he conjugated his Espanol like hermanos in Spanish Harlem, articulated his Italiano as sweet as the chocolate Sicilian melting in the center of Little Italy, that impelled his brothers in blue to slash his tires, sever his fuel line, shove human shit into his tank. Handbrakes on his Indian Scout glued tight like a reservation. 3. It most certainly was the way he translated mob politics, interpreting crime organized over shots of Canadian whiskey, that promoted him to first detective, unraveling a staged kidnapping orchestrated by a Helena Rubinstein heir who schemed to reclaim jewels splurged on his Negro lover. 4. It must have been the Espanol, the Italiano interrogative tactics that convinced Commissioner Kennedy and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. to fet a colored officer in front of his Irish white pastels. 5. It wasn't the way I bungled Buenos Dias, Senora, or Buongiorno, Signorina, in Mrs. Osco's 8th grade language class that held me back from passing my uncle's island appraise. My grandfather never spoke Spanish in front of me, never spoke on his older brother, who made history a short ride from our New London shore. 6. My Italiano never flowed like his fluency in foreign language. My Espanol never afforded private lessons from the first black motorcycle captain of NYC. Had it, we would have chatted as Bohemian kin, exchanging verse like candlelight dancing in its shadow before blowing into a final wish. And so, I like to honor his legacy, and the legacy of my family and the heritage of my family, and how it extends, wow, decades, centuries. And you know, it's very important because coming from a child of the African diaspora and part of the systematic undertow of racism was to sever the heritage, right? To sever the connection, because that was the strength. And this next poem I'm going to read is about my great grandmother, Donnie Fullwood, who is my maternal great-grandmother. This is my paternal great-grandmother. And so she was known to walk around with a pistol, and she was no joke. And there was one story, my grandmother's name is Martha, and there was one story where my grandmother was working in this household. They were in Georgia, and the wife's name was Martha too. And then one day the husband came home and said to my grandmother, you know, your name is Martha too, I hope I don't get the two of you mixed up. And his wife had heard this, and she went to my grandmother and said, please don't tell your mother what he said. He was just, please don't tell her, because she was known to be no joke, right? So I took this history of her, and she had my stepfather was Peg Leg Dan, and Peg Leg Dan lost his leg. It was ran over by a train on the tracks, and he received a lawsuit, and he was Peg Leg Dan. So I infused this story with a story from the novel Roots, Alex Haley's Roots. And in the novel, there's something called the Black Grapevine. And the Black Grapevine was ways that enslaved Africans would use their wit to free themselves. So one example was that if it was a light-skinned and dark-skinned African, they would get in the carriage and they would pretend to be slave master and slave, and when they got to the checkpoint, they would pass through. Another one was that the enslaved African knew that the, I forgot what they were called, the patrolmen and so forth, knew that they couldn't read because they were, you know, poor Europeans. And so he would have this paper, these like his freedom papers, and he knew they couldn't read, and they would just pass them along instead of saying that they didn't know how to read. And the last one was that the enslaved African would pretend that he had a stutter, a stammer, and he would stay there for so long they get frustrated and just pass him along. So I infused the Black Grapevine with my great-grandmother and the history of the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so this poem talks about how once the massacre in Tulsa occurred, it spread through the Black Grapevine and it got to my great-grandparents, and they prepared themselves. So a Black Grapevine tale, inspired by the novel Roots. 1. The Black Grapevine unravels in undertone the massacre of Tulsa. Barren arms unclench the scent of hooded ghosts, roasting colored women and children in a town of eternal flame. Their maternal infant ash sailing along the breath of the Mississippi. 2. My second great-grandfather, Peg Leg Dan, sleeps one limb up in the corner of their Akala home. My great-grandmother, Donnie Fullwood, blackens the bottom of cornbread while counting her bullets. 3. My fourth grade grandmother, Martha, dreams of sunny blue babies bouncing in a lap of blaze. 4. Stale shadows wafted the horizon of their home. Pegleg levels his Whitworth out the window. Fullwood steals cross yard, brands the barrel of her Colt into the nape of the hooded ghost, dousing supremacy on the fur of their front lawn. 5. A thumb steady click and ignition of blackness, a swamp of blood. 6. A parish of fiendish men scuttle like frightened children spooked by ghosts. 7. A vigilant fourth grader, silent-eyed in the attic, witnesses her mother, denature, a flea plucked from the pelt of her freedom. The Black Grapevine unravels an undertone of an uprising in Ocala. The midnight stance of a rifled, one-legged man, a lucid fourth grader, and a cornbread blackening Cherokee trigger, thumb steady, great grandmother. And so I moved from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, Martha Montgomery, who moved to Norwich from Georgia, where my mother was 5 years old and my aunt was 4. And they moved here and they lived on Summit Street. And she lived with Aunt Nancy for a while. And then the Dan Jenkins Park was in progress to be made. And so it was eminent domain, and so she was forced to move from Summit Street, which was the overlooking the marina where the ambulance company is now. And then she bought the home on 575 New London Turnpike, where I grew up at. And in that yard, we had 2 pear trees, an apple tree, a cherry stone tree, a grapevine, a vegetable garden, a flower garden, 2 two-car garages, a duplex home with about 12 bedrooms, and she really established a legacy for us. And a lot of what I do and who I am in the community and so forth stems from her. And so this poem is for her. She had a twin sister, Mary, so it's Martha and Mary. But Mary died at a very young age, as a toddler, I think, about, maybe like 5. And so we never knew anything about Mary, but my grandmother lived to be 102, a month shy of 102. And so towards her last days, dementia was setting in, and she started asking for Mary. And so I wrote this poem titled Twin Cotton Skin, a sestina for Gammy. And a sestina is a poetic form where you have 7 stanzas, and you have 6 words that you use, and you interchange those words at the end of each line throughout the poem. And in the last stanza, you use all 6 words. And so the 6 words that I'm going to use in this poem are century, reflection, twin cotton skin, anchored, eyes, and one. Twin cotton skin, a sestina for Gammy. My grandmother mourned her sister for a century, racing dementia through a field of reflection, burly thorns nicking the limbs of their twin cotton skin. Identical souls swirling like little fat clouds, anchored in wild blue until both collapsed. Her elderly eyes collude on God's reason, why she was the chosen one, made to stand. Their mother tied 2 ribbons into one. Twin plaits parted my grandmother's hair a century ago. She was 2. Aunt Mary's age the same in eyes. My grandmother's shone bright, blinding the devil's reflection. Aunt Mary's fastened like cast iron shackles anchored to limbs of slave children baptized in twin cotton skin. My grandmother tore daughters from her twin cotton skin, divorcing granddad's thick hand, tearing 2 into one able black-boned woman who migrated north, anchored in Benedict Arnold's late 17th century city. Norwich refuses to speak on his reflection, how he hoaxed General Washington with sallow eyes. She climbed Mount Calvary, the breath of God in her eyes. Her sister's ribbon sewn into her twin cotton skin. Grandchildren, not knowing her soul had a reflection, until their aunts almost fell beneath a wild blue, one moment too long to forget. She fought a century for taking too long to run backward, to be anchored by the other half of her lone self, free while anchored by the only shadow she's seen smile with her own eyes, at the sibling seeking herself for a century, softly, like the nurse that now oils her twin cotton skin. She plaits her hair, braiding 100 years into one long memory. Her head tender, like a reflection, smiling back into a mirror, at a reflection, rearing daughters who fructified grandchildren, anchored by a black bone woman shielding her skin, shielding her kin under one moon. Her resemblance twinkles in my cousin's eyes, young Georgian sisters who now knit their twin cotton skin, like Mary and Martha, who parted a century ago. In one last breath, her eyes freed a century of olden memories, anchored in twin cotton skin, beating dementia through a field of reflection. And so, everything I am, I owe to my grandmother, Martha Montgomery, and everything that my family is. And one of the things that my mother taught us to be was strong, and to take care and protect each other. I have 10 siblings. So my grandmother had 2 daughters, and my mother had 11 children, and my aunt had 8. 8. So automatically, 1 woman, 2 daughters, 19 grandchildren off the bat. And when she died, she was a great grandmother. And so the legacy just continues. And so we grew up in Norwich, and of course we all went to NFA. My mother went there as well. And during the mid-70s, from my recollection, I was born in '73, there were mid-70s through the early '80s, there were race rides at NFA, on the NFA Green. And I heard a lot of people in town speaking about these rides. And one of them was started because someone had spat on my sister at school and called her a nigger. But he didn't know that she came from a very large family. So one day, my 2 oldest brothers, Harvey, so my father's name is Harvey, and then my brother is Harvey Jr., and my nephew's Harvey III. So one day, my 2 oldest brothers, Harvey and Michael, who rarely ever went to school, decided that they were going to go to school. And they asked my mom for a ride. And so they got to school, and unbeknownst to my mom's thinking, oh, my sons, they really want to get their education. So one of them is saying bye to my mom, and the other one is sneaking crowbar out the trunk. And that was my brother Michael, who passed away years ago. So this poem is titled "Another Ride on the NFA Green" from Michael. I wonder what Mommy thought when you and Harvey intently missed the bus, devised a ride to school. Her older son appealing to the nature of motherhood, while you slipped from the back seat, jimmied the trunk, and eased that crowbar into your book bag. I wonder what that jock thought when you crashed that crowbar into his rib cage, cracking true bone like twig. A wince of an apology noosed in autumn air. His superiority heaving atop sun-kissed blades cut the day before. Appetent grass mistook his fears. Appetent grass mistook his tears for morning dew. I wonder if he contemplated first period the day before, the animus he spat into our sister's hair, anchored by the nigger cast across the hall outside of homeroom, the revere he received, the gloat, the N on his varsity jacket applauded for meaning much more than Norwich. I wonder when he awoke, spewing the red and white colors of our mascot, scurrying from a mosh of black fists, if he knew the victories soaked into the soil, the cracked bones before his, infuriated that our ancestry destined her children to remain free. I wonder during band practice if the millennials knowingly march atop the victories, the ties and losses of their kin. If the symbolists clash alloy on the same patch you crashed that crowbar, were you assured no one would ever again soil our sister's education at the academy? I want to get to the poems so I can talk to you guys. All right, I have three more. I'm done. This one was part of the Witness Stone project that was started in Guilford. And the Witness Stone project is a project of homage former enslaved Africans who pretty much were forgotten. And so they are brought back to life by these small stones with their name engraved on them, and they're placed in cemeteries or other locations around the state. And a lot of cities and towns are getting involved with this, and I'm really looking forward to the day that Norwich jumps on that train. So I was invited to be part of the project for New Haven, and there was a couple, her name was Pink Primus, and I forgot her husband's name, it'll come back to me. And so she was owned by Captain Primus, who was in the molasses business, which of course is for rum. And so there's a school called the Foot School, and the sixth graders were doing a project on this, and they were doing research, and so they sent me all this research. And what I found over and over again is that most of the information was just confirming that she was property. Her and her husband were property and so forth. And I was like, okay, well, what am I gonna write? I just don't really want to reflect about them being property. I really want to capture something about their legacy. And they were able to buy some property. And she had a daughter named Chloe. And I'm like, okay. And I said to myself, well, her name is Pink. And I was like, well, I wonder what her favorite color was. And from there, this poem was born, and it's titled Shoots of Plants Blooming in Spring. For Pink Primus, circa 1791, the Witness Stone Project, New Haven chapter. 1. Her slave master's favorite color was most certainly green, the shade of profit from selling people like stolen property. A secondary color misused to attune the voice in her skin to a second-class rainbow bent on mashing molasses. 2. I wonder what her favorite color was. Was it the color of a freedom blue sky, or the shimmer of a lake under the sun? Was it the color of a flaring soul, the embers of ancestry fanning the flame of her descendants' dreams? Was it the color of a desert African bush? A lioness beige, camouflaged by the sandy hue of the Kalahari? 3. Was it the color of her stark eyes, dark as a North Star night? Or the color of a candle illuminating a train traveling underground? Was it a deep rebel maroon, rich like a warrior's melanin, insurrecting the indigenous resistance to colonialism? 4. Was it the color of matrimony? 2 crayons coloring in and out the lines of love, the color of emancipation, the color of their land bought by Dragon Bank, a pasture as green as an evening in the Eden of Ethiopia? 5. Was it the color of pride, strength, courage, charisma, wisdom, conviction, involution, companionship, direction, guidance, purpose? 6. Or was it the color of her name? The color of a Mandinka woman, the color of ether, existence, of a Zulu queen armored in bronze, a matriarch, protector, provider, nurturer, the color of a cornerstone who bore witness to the dawn of a mountain, the color of the bottom of her foot rooted in the soil of American history? 7. No, I believe her favorite color was the color of her daughter, Chloe. Greek, meaning yellow and green. Young green shoots of plants blooming in spring. And so we moved to the Harris sisters. And I was able to do a reading at Prudence Crandall, I think last summer, and was able to, feel the energy of the land there. And so when I was asked by Alana to pay homage to that heritage, I was honored and nervous. Like, oh boy, okay, like, what do you say, right? How do you say it? Well, it's poetry, so there's a way to how to say it, but what do you say? And she sent me some research and so forth, some articles, and so of course I was reading, and there's some very in-depth knowledge on the history of Sarah and Mary Harris. And so I was like, okay, so what direction do I take? What approach do I take? And I'm looking over the information, the research, and Sarah Harris was the first African descent student to be admitted to Prudence Crandall School, and then others shortly after. And then, of course, the black laws of Connecticut were barring out-of-state colored students. And of course, the folks of Canterbury weren't too crazy about the idea of integration and blah, 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 blah. And so I was reading, and then I saw that a mob had set blaze to the school. And I'm like, okay. And I thought about that, and it didn't stop Prudence Crandall, it didn't stop the Harris sisters, it didn't stop the flow of love, really. And so I focused on that. And I said, okay, the ashes were part of the plan, right? From destruction comes growth. And so that's the title of this poem. And there's a reference to Sankofa. And Sankofa is from the culture of Ghana. It's from the Twi language, and it means to retrieve, right? To look back and retrieve. And there's a movie titled Sankofa, 1997, that focuses on African retrieving your African heritage, never forgetting where you come from, and so forth. And there's a symbol that I recently had tatted, and it's a symbol of a heron who bends her neck backwards and drops an egg onto her back to never forget where you come from. And so this poem is titled "The Ashes Were Part of the Plan" for Sarah Harris, Mary Harris, and Prudence Crandall. It's in the voice of Sarah Harris. Not even a classroom ignited into ember could make me quit. Ambition burning like the gallant walls of Prudence Crandall. My soul sang a prelude to the blues, etched between the integrated lines of a notebook, announcing my name as the first African descent pupil to approach Prudence with a spirit letter from the principle of Psalms. Teach me like you teach them. A spirit letter for my sister. Teach her like you teach them. A spirit letter from diasporic women across the continent. Teach us like you teach them. Connecticut black laws barring colored out-of-state students couldn't unloop the cursive written by the hand of the Lord himself. Not even the stout of flame scathing the Canterbury landscape could char such sacred parchment. Our flame inked a simple sentence. Study the lexicon of love. Steer the coals of your internal incandescence like smoldering spikes assembling a railroad, traveling underground beneath Rose City, where thorns safeguard flowers blossoming on top of the ruins of racism. The ashes were part of the plan. Daughters of Sankofa, reach back to retrieve your heritage. Reach back like the neck of a heron, folding back to place the egg of ancestry on its back, looking back to douse the souls of white folk, frightened that our purpose would spread like the wings of a heron, flaming like the feathers of a phoenix, rising like the renovated walls of a Prudence Crandall school for colored girls who considered liberation when freedom wasn't enough. And I will end with this poem that I recently wrote. So I've kind of been asked to I'm kind of like this unofficial funeral poet. Like some folks have passed away and people have asked me to recite a poem. And it's kind of gotten to the point where if I go to the funeral, I'm kind of a little mentally prepared that it might happen, it might not. And so there were a couple of deaths recently in BlackRoseCity, and several, including one today, a friend of mine who's actually in the poem. His father passed, and the funeral's right there on Cliff Street at St. Joe's. I stopped him real quick. I couldn't see him, but I left him a copy of this poem. It started me thinking my own demise, right? Okay, well, And so this line came to me, "Bury me in BlackRoseCity." And I'm like, okay. And so this poem just takes you on a journey. I'm just gonna say that. So, "Bury me in BlackRoseCity," an elegy for Norwich, Connecticut. Oh, and a quick sidebar is that I was here the other day and with Julie, and I met the children's librarian, and her name is Mrs. Fields, and it didn't dawn on me. She's like, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I live in Harvard, but I was raised in Norwich, and I went to NFA, and I went to teachers." She goes, "Oh, you might know my husband." I said, "Who's your husband?" She's like, "Mr. Fields." I'm like, "I love Mr. Fields." He's the 8th grade junior high teacher. He was awesome. He still was alive. He's awesome. And I'm like, "He's in my poem." And I was like, I was here earlier downstairs, working on a presentation I had the day before. And so I'm like, my laptop's downstairs. When I go downstairs, I'm gonna email it to you. She goes, his birthday's tomorrow. I'm like, oh, that's a great gift for him. And so, I was very excited. And so, the poem reflects on significant things and people in my life. Some of the people are still here, some aren't. But so this is Bury Me in BlackRoseCity. 1. When I die, bury me in BlackRoseCity, where Mahan Elementary taught me how to daydream, sitting at my desk, behind the piano, Miss Galuli's 5th grade class, fiending for McDonald's from across the street, chicken McNuggets sweet, where Salem Turnpike turned into Gradescape, zooming in and out of electric poles, where every colored complexion caught disco-like fever to roll, where stories were told, too many to capture in my eulogy. Bury me in BlackRoseCity, where Teachers Memorial Junior High field trip me to Boston and New York City, strawberry schnapps spilt in the back of the bus, streaming down the aisle, young 8th grade and wild, with Artie, Kevin, Katie, Tara, Yolanda, and Hot Chin, where our infinite bond began, and I found a handful of lifelong friends. 2. Bury me in BlackRoseCity, on the hill between Jane Arms and Oakwood Knoll, behind Bonanzas and Zares, and let me stare into the Valley of Thames, where the squirrels will engrave our names into the coat of their acorns. Bury me in BlackRoseCity, on the west side, on the apex of Summit Street, back when Aunt Nancy's neighborhood was a cultural crock pot, Jews, blacks, and browns stirring the stew before the recipe eminent domained into Dan Jenkins Park. Bury me at the block party in '83, the bridge is over, blaring into the field, where the brothers forged like steel whenever New London knuckleheads tried to jump back, but headed back down Route 32, mumbling through fat lips about what they should of and shouldn't do. 3. Bury me in BlackRoseCity, next to NFA, Mohegan Park, Hamilton Football Field, East Side, Laurel Hill, Lake Street, the Red Rabbit, Sportsman, Portuguese Club, Johnson's Sandpit, Bowling Alley birthday parties, Greenville, Tatville Carnival, Norwich Tech, Young Folks Shop, Gordon's, Palace Theater, Norwich Cinema 1 and 2, Barker's, King's, Ames, Marcus Plaza, Benny's, Two Legs, Norwich Town Mall Arcade, Caldor's, Buellland Church, the King Center, Spalding Pond, Mohegan Park Zoo, St. Peter and Paul Fair, Uncas, Buckingham Veterans School, the Sheridan, the golf course, Malerba's Farm, Melrose Park, the dirt bike trails, Forward's Pond, East Great Plains Firehouse, Delia's, Bacatora's Bakery, Seafood, etc., the first Kentucky Fried Chicken, the PLAV, VFW, American Legion, Ping's, 783, Woolworths, G Fox, the YMCA, Otis Library, King Wah, Oak Tree, Olympic Pizza, Nickel Night at the Village Green, Mohegan Park Apartments, the Manicure, A&P, BB's, Both Friendlies, Fairlawns, Elizabeth Wood Street School, the Rec, Masonic Temple, Principal's Mansion, Freshman Football, Coach Spain, Coach Mignault, Mr. Iovino, Mr. Greenwich, Mrs. Handel, Mr. Fields, Mr. Blackstone, Mr. Snitkin, Mr. Sorello, Mr. Tarka, Mr. Kotrova, Mr. and Mrs. Osco, my mother, Mrs. Knowles, who took no shit from no student, Miss Fitzgerald, Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Hogan, the City Dump, Warwick's Hill, Norwich Motel, Charlie's Supermarket, Scooby's, Radio Shack, Tom McCann, Genevieve's, Uncas on Thames, the State Hospital, Bacchus, Crocodiles, Indian Leap, McDonald's, Friday night Burger King parking lot fights, The Falls, Montville Road, Pizza Hut, TVCCA, Seaside, 575, before Walmart was a vacant lot. 4. Bury me in BlackRoseCity, in Maplewood Cemetery, next to Gammy, and Eve Montgomery, and Miss Macy too. And maybe my roots will seep through the soil for my sage to see how my grandbaby is an extension of legacy, a branch of the forward tree. Teach her like Professor Knowles taught me, how to strap on your armor and leave the battlefield bloody. Let me gaze at a Mohegan sun eclipse. Tell the city I did it for them, and I do it again when God gives me a new strategy to play the game again. I did it for my family, yours and mine. And when it's my time, tell them what I told them, and tell them again that the petals of my city wilt and renew like a season. Leave them with a reason to garnish the rose that grew through concrete. Tupacian philosophy. We've shed so many tears in this thug life. Dear Mama, thank you for making me and raising me, so one day they bury me in Black Rose City. Yeah, so now's the time to talk, if you want.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'm wondering if there was a moment in your life when you first thought to yourself, I am a poet.
Oh, yeah, hold on, I need my glasses because now I can't see this. Well, I didn't start writing poetry until I was 26, and I was in senior year of college, and I went late. I was in I studied sociology, and I had a sociology teacher who she was really cool. I forgot her name, but she was really cool. She was like a hippie. She had long dresses and socks, and she had me reading authors, black authors that up until then I'd never even heard of, like Nathan McCall, Makes Me Want to Holler, and several others. And it was in her class that I just started thinking about things in my life and so forth, and I just started spewing things down, and it was just coming out in the form of poetry. And then a college friend said there was a poetry mic in Hartford, and so I started going in 2000, and I met artists and people, a collective that we just bonded, and I was just writing ever since. But I think, to answer your question, there wasn't a moment where I was a poet, but there was a moment where I wanted to be a rapper. Hip hop came out. Hip hop was born the same year I was born, in '73. So by the time it hit, BlackRoseCity in the early '80s, it was phenomenal. And of course, there are poets, Eric B. and Rakim and Slick Rick, and if you just listen to their music and read their work, you can see the rhyme scheme and so forth. So the element of poetry, which I didn't really, it was finally somebody that looked like me, talked like me, was taking poetry and making it awesome and cool and putting it into music, and so it was great. So that always stayed with me and so forth. But it was 26 when it was 6 when I said I wanted to be a rapper, and it was 26 when I wanted to be a poet. Well, that was the defining moment. Spencer, love you, man.
Love you,
Peace. Thanks for coming, man.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Anytime. Folks, any thoughts, ideas, questions, concepts? Now you're still filling things in? Go ahead, Ed, yeah.
One, you're beautiful.
Oh, you are too, thank you.
He is such a beautiful man. I've known him for a long time.
What's up, Will?
You fill my soul. But I do have a question about, I love the way you presented the stories behind your poetry, because a lot of times when you read poetry, if you're not familiar, it's like, wait, you can't really figure out
where you're going, yeah.
So it was just great to be able to have that a little bit before.
Mm-hmm.
But your richness of your own history, family and culture, and when did that begin? Was that sort of, imbued in you from your grandmother, great-grandmother, where did that all come from?
Honestly, it came from the passing of my father. So my mom and dad were married. They had 9 children, and I was their last, and my father died when I was 6 months old. He had a heart attack on the job, and he died. Actually, I should have read Sinking in Moonlight alone. Maybe I'll squeeze that in. And so never knowing anything about him and so forth, right? And so, of course, that was always like the gaping hole that I always tried to fill with all kind of things, healthy, mostly unhealthy things about my life and so forth. And so, never knowing, I think that's where it really sparked from, never knowing and wanting to know and getting, pieces here and there. And then a lot of folks started to pass away when I was younger, like my grandparents and so forth. So all the knowledge was kind of dissipating and so forth. And and so I wanted to know as much as I could, and I did some research, and then I put together a family tree that needs to be updated, because that was like 12 years ago. It's a whole lot of babies. And leaving a blueprint for everyone else in my family and so forth, so they don't have to, dig as much as I did. I didn't do a lot of digging, but so that they can just hear it is and pass it along and so forth, because it really does make a difference. People like, my mom's always like, oh, you remind me of your father, the way you look and carry yourself. And people that knew my dad, they'll look at me one time and be like, you look just like your father. So it's just like, but I don't have any memories, not a single one, And so these poems help me etch my own memories together. I have pictures and so forth. Like I found out my dad there's another poem titled His Last Name Mine. My dad was in the Navy. He was in the Korean War. He was a veteran. So I sent away for his records and found that he was out. He was a rigger. He rigged parachutes and so forth on the USS Wright. And so I never saw he's buried in London. And I never saw his grave before, but they were always telling me that your dad's buried over there, all the Knowles are buried over there. And then one day in 1999, a friend of mine passed away in the same cemetery, so I decided that was the day I was going to go see my dad's grave. And I went to the sexton and got his marker and was looking for it, and I couldn't find it. And it was a plaque that was submerged in the ground, and it was fall, so the leaves had covered it over. So I'm looking, and I see this indentation of leaves, and so I brush them aside, and I see my dad's name, and I just lost it. I just was like a baby, like literally like a baby, like on my knees, like couldn't stand. I always thought that was so dramatic in like movies and shows, and people cry and they go to the ground. Like, it was like, really, like you can't stand. Like, no, that really happens. Like I couldn't stand. And thank goodness my niece was there. My niece Ursula was there, and at the funeral, and she must have saw me over there, and I just felt her like literally picking me up. So it's what I have, right? And I really believe that's why like a majority of my poems are elegies or homages to people who passed away, memories and so forth, because I've been having them since 6 months. I'm 48, so it's a long time. I hope that answers your questions alone. Well, question. Anybody else?
I just want to say one other thing,
Yeah,
Fred. You mentioned your granddaughter, only I know her name.
Yeah.
But I think it's beautiful that, much of what you have expressed in your poetry that you shared with us was the history, the historical stuff, and how that shaped you. But you are always looking forward, this little girl who you adore, and making sure she is in touch with all of this. She won't have to do the searching.
So there's another poem in the collection. It's titled Emery Enters Her Grandmother's Garden. So when my daughter was pregnant, my grandmother passed before she had my granddaughter, Emery Sage Thompson. And so there's a book by Alice Walker titled A Collection of Essays, Our Mother's Gardens. And she talks about the sacrifice that women, in particular black women, made in order to establish legacy, take care of their families and so forth. And so I took that concept and I was like, well, what if their souls met at the crossroad? My grandmother leaving and my granddaughter coming. And they had this conversation and so forth. And just trying my best to, play my part and prepare as much as I can. And what I've been doing since she's been born, she's 4, she'll be 5 in September, she's 4.5. And so the day that she was born, I started a journal, and so I journaled to her. I call it the Sage Chronicles, and I don't journal every day. You know, sometimes I'll every day, and then there'll be a gap and so forth. But I'm on volume 5 of those chronicles, and so you know, one day when she's ready to read it, and I don't hold anything back. I think I share about 98% of myself in those journals. And so one day when she's ready to read them, then she can read them and, you know, really hopefully get some gems and know where she comes from and so forth. So, yeah, thank you, Anne. I've known Anne for about 20 years. She was one of my first teachers who taught me the game, women-centered, VIP program, violence is preventable. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, certainly. I have heard you speak many times.
I know you will.
And I love your writings, but it's the eloquence in which you provide that to us that makes us want to learn more. And it's just your storytelling. It's amazing. Thank you for that.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a long time. You know, I've been doing this for like 20 years now, and I wasn't like this when I first started. You know, I started with spoken word poetry and slam poetry, and so my poems are very energetic, radical, and I get there, they're like, slow down. I was like, get it all out. And so, you know, that was in 2000. And so I was, you know, it was when I went to the National Poetry Slam competition in 2001 in Seattle, Washington, that really opened my eyes, like, yeah, I love this. And so around 2004, I was like, you know what, I want to polish my skills. So I went to school, my master's, and at Southern, and my mentor, Ken Flory, I knew my grades weren't the greatest, so I knew I was probably not going to get it on paper, so I met with him. And, you know, I was like, you know, I really want to get in this program. He's like, oh, you don't really qualify. I didn't study English in undergrad. And, you know, I'm there for like an hour, and I'm persistent, right? And it's how the universe just makes things happen. He's like, all right, I'll tell you what. If you take these 6 undergrad English courses and you pass them, we'll enroll you into the master's program. And I was like, bet. Right? And so I took them. I kind of cheated a little because some of them were split undergrad/grad courses, so I kind of cheated. Sorry, Dr. Flory, professor now. But so I took the classes and I studied up there from 2005 to 2007, and I learned some literary skills and techniques, and I infused the two together. And so I'm very thankful for that, and I've just been working on the craft ever since, and I spent a lot of time. This manuscript took years. I don't even. It's embarrassing how many years it took. But I'll spend hours on just a single verb because verbs convey the action and so forth. And if it's not right, I can't. You know, I've gotten better, but I'm kind of what do they call it there? I guess OCD with my words, right? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Any last thoughts? Okay.
I just want to say you did a good job.
Thanks, man. That's my nephew Will right there in the building.
And I'm happy I came.
Yeah, man. It's good to see you, brother. It's good to see you, man. We're going to wrap in a second and so forth, right? All right. Yeah.
I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you for being here. You are our native son. Yes, you are.
Thank you.
And I wish you nothing but continued success.
Oh, thank you.
And it's documented. You know.
I know you always document everything. No, thank you. I really appreciate it. To know that the city's got my back, Black Rose's got my back, because I wouldn't be anything without you guys. And so I'm just gonna keep pushing it forward, and just keep putting us on the map and so forth. They're gonna know what BlackRoseCity is, and here and beyond. And then when I die, bury me in BlackRoseCity. Thank you very much. I want to thank Julie. I want to thank Ilana. I want to thank Otis Library. I want to thank the Harris sisters and their ancestry and homage, and really, utilizing me to help tell part of their story. And I just am extremely thankful. Continue to spread love, light, and laughter, and let's do what we're here to do. Hey!
Izzy, I like, no.
Oh, thank you. Yes.